I've always been a huge fan of global histories, the sweep of history, and in particular, drawing lessons for the present day. History is this testing ground from which we can learn how to move forward. But when it comes to the history of the economy, it's been written by men, for men, about men. Yeah. And so I really wanted to write a global economic history that, for the first time puts women at the heart of the story, to show that, women have been movers and shakers of economic history, that women have determined the wealth and the poverty of nations.
That's it. And also, I would like to ask you, the second question is what's the reader going to find in Económica when they open it and say, okay, what's in here?
Yeah. So I would say that history, in economic terms, is one long story of rise and decline. It's the story of one civilization after another, building great wealth, achieving so much, before ending in a ditch ready to be found by archaeologists centuries or millennia down the line. But you cannot tell that story of rise and decline without women. And I would say...
Half of the population, 50%.
Half of the population, that is right. And I would say if there is one message at the heart of this book, it is that virtually every successful civilization in history has been one where women were at the heart of the economy. But virtually every civilizational collapse has been preceded by a process of rolling back women's rights, restricting women's freedoms. And I think that there's a lot we can learn from that. If we want to stay at the top of the economic league tables today, we need to avoid repeating that mistake that was made by so many civilizations in the past.
So that's really an original view of the decline and fall of civilizations. I've never listened to it before.
Yeah.
So that's up to you.
When I think certainly historians for a long time have written about rise and decline, whether it's rise and decline of the Roman Empire, the collapse of the Bronze Age, the rise of Spain, and the stagnation that followed the Golden Age. When you think about China, India, the Middle East, these were parts of the world that dominated the global economy for millennia. And Europe was poor. Europe was the periphery. And so again, how did China, India, and the Middle East go from having immense wealth, from being at the heart of the global economy, to then suffering stagnation and decline? So, historians have written a lot about these things, and there tend to be, the things they tend to focus on revolve around things like environmental degradation, changes in the climate that perhaps affect the fertility of the soil, and with it the success of the economy. Things like growing bureaucracies, inflated bureaucracies that suck the life out of the economy. So that there are lots of interesting ideas out there as to what explains rise and decline. But women tend to be missing from those explanations, and women are one half of the story. So I think by putting that, story of rise and decline alongside the repeated rise and decline in women's rights, actually, I think we can learn a lot. Because, I would say often when we think about women's rights and history, we perhaps have a misinterpretation of the past. We imagine that women's rights have been on an upward trend, that women's rights were absolutely terrible in the past, and then they advanced, onwards and upwards. But actually that's sad. That's not the way it was. As I show in the book, there were many early civilizations. If we think about, say, the ancient Egyptians, where women could own property, they could own land, they could start their own businesses. they could divorce their husbands. Ancient Egypt, in many ways quite modern and quite advanced in terms of women's rights. If we think about, say...
Or, for example, in Egypt, they took part in the pyramid building?
Took part, exactly. Okay. So one of my favourite archaeological findings, and there's a lot of archeology that goes in this book, because it goes back through millennia, not just centuries. I mean, it goes all the way back to the Stone Age. So I've had to draw a lot on findings from archaeology, but one of my favourite findings is that for the building of the Great Pyramids at Giza, I mean, this was an immense building project. I mean, it took decades. It took thousands of workers. Yeah. And so for the building of the pyramids, you had to build whole workers' villages where people would live. Yeah. And they had their own cemeteries. And the workers' cemetery there, 1/2 of the burials were for women.
I mean...
So is there no better evidence that women were there alongside men working to build the pyramids? So...
What kind of work would they done?
What kind of work? So, I mean, on the one hand, you might think that they were perhaps working within the home, cooking and providing for their husbands, but actually they were doing much more than that. Yeah. So they were, producing food and cloth for the workforce. They were mixing mortar on building sites, but there's also some evidence that women were doing more strenuous work as well. So when you look at the skeletal remains in the workers' cemetery, there's some evidence that women were doing some of the hard labour, as well as the supportive tasks as well. It certainly goes to show that when you look at the past, there were some parts of the world where, women really did, really were actively involved in the workforce and were considered pretty equal to men, actually.
Yeah, for example, like talking about archaeology and the equality of the job, kind of jobs that women did. Like, for example, one of the most fascinating discoveries you've done in this book is like talking about the Stone Age and about the hunters, the game hunters. I mean, when one thinks about Stone Age hunters, well, you think like a really great, big, enormous man.
Big man with a club.
But what have you discovered in that respect?
Oh, do you know, I really wanted to start the book in the Stone Age because our understanding of the Stone Age casts such a shadow over modern day discussions about gender.
Because we think about the Stone Age is the natural way.
Man the hunter.
Yeah, and also like the natural way of our brain.
So
if we have like erroneous ways of seeing like a Stone Age, I mean, that's like really perverse on the way we see like the present too.
Yeah, well, those that fight against feminism today, I think they often see the pursuit of gender equality as being like anti-human evolution. Yeah. There are some, I think, who have a more misogynistic, more sexist take on society who say, men and women are different. Men are the kind of active agents, the providers, and women are these, more passive creatures. And that all goes back to the Stone Age because men were the hunters. And so, we can't, to fight for equality is to fight human evolution. It's to fight, thousands of years of human history. Yeah. And so in the book, I really wanted to go back to the Stone Age, look at the most recent archaeological evidence. And what is really stunning is how we can now challenge that idea of man the hunter. And, a lot of this evidence is really very recent. So my Stone Age chapter begins with, in 2018, in Peru, high up in the Peruvian Andes, there was a discovery of a burial of a great hunter. And this hunter was buried with a 24-piece hunting toolkit with some pointed stone tools that could be attached to a stick and thrown at animals. To catch and kill animals for food, the sustenance within the community. And when this burial was first discovered, the assumption was it was a male hunter because archaeologists have long assumed if you find a skeleton buried with hunting tools or with weapons, that it must be a man, because we have this image of man the hunter and man the warrior. And so actually, until relatively recently, no one checked the science of the DNA or the bones or the teeth to see. The assumption was it was a man. And of course that then seemed to add support to the vision of man the hunter, because you find bodies, you assume they're men, and that then supports the idea of man the hunter. But what happened in 2018 with this discovery is they scientifically tested, the bones, the teeth, and what they found was this was a woman. This was a female hunter, a really respected prize hunter. And archaeologists gave her a name, WMP6.
What a nice name.
It sounds very mathematical. But WMP6, it stands for Willamea Pacha, because Willamea Pacha is the archaeological dig, like the place of the Willamea Pacha individual 6. It's like the sixth body found. WMP6. It's not very catchy, but the local people there, when it attracted journalists from across the world, because journalists were stunned that this was a woman, 9,000-year-old female hunter. The journalists came and so attracted a lot of attention to this part of Peru. And so the local people gave this hunter a new name, Wara Wara, and that translates as star. Because she became like the star of the international press. But she was also a star 9,000 years ago through her hunting, providing for her local community. So I think, all the way back in the Stone Age, women were doing the same kinds of things that men were doing, hunting alongside men, providing for their community. And I think with that, we can lift that shadow. We can confront that idea of man the hunter, show that, women have always been at the heart of the economy.